The COBIT 5 Foundation Certificate, Module 3, COBIT 5 Enablers. Lesson 3, Organizational Structures. Welcome to Module 3, Lesson 3, where you'll learn about organizational structures. In this lesson, we'll study the good practices of organizational structures and key rules. An organizational structure is defined as an enabler of governance and of management, includes the enterprise and its structures, hierarchies, and dependencies. Organizational structures are the key decision-making entities in an enterprise. An example is a steering committee, which might provide direction for a department. The diagram on your screen shows the enabler model applied to organizational structures. Only the good practices dimension contains guidance that is specific to the organizational structure's enabler. Organizational structure provides the means of directing the enterprise, allocating responsibilities, coordinating resources, and monitoring activity and performance. An organizational structure has both internal and external stakeholders. For example, an external stakeholder, such as a supplier, might have an interest in the decisions made by the enterprise. They might contribute to the decision-making. In racy terms, they are consulted. Or they might be affected by decisions made. They are informed. In either case, the supplier has an interest in how decisions are made and who buy. An organizational structure has a life cycle. As an enterprise adapts to meet new circumstances and challenges, it may find that it needs to reorganize itself. Most of us have direct experience with this. COBIT describes a number of good practices for organizational structures. These include operating principles. Operating principles refers to the practicalities of running an enterprise. Remember that an organizational structure provides the means of directing the enterprise, allocating responsibilities, coordinating resources, and monitoring activity and performance. So, operating principles describe some of the practical arrangements for doing these things. For example, meetings. What meetings should be held? Who should attend? How often should they be held? The starting point here should be to ask what meetings are required to serve the needs of the enterprise. Rules of conduct for meetings. For example, punctuality, coming prepared, sticking to the agenda. Documentation. What documentation is needed? In what format? Where it will be held? How it will be accessed or communicated? Other good practices for organizational structures include defining the span of control of the elements of the organizational structure. What decisions fall within the scope of each element? Or, looked at it from another perspective, what decisions must be made by each element? And, associated with the last point, defining the level of authority. What size of decisions can each element make? An obvious example relates to spending decisions. But money is not the only factor. Only the governors of the enterprise can decide to change its strategy. Take a few minutes to write down some possible consequences of an unclear span of control or level of authority. Other good practices for organizational structures are delegation of authority. This refers to an element of the organization delegating some decision rights to a subordinate element. Usually, it involves a manager empowering a subordinate to make decisions, often related to a particular task. The manager, though, retains accountability. Successful delegation can reduce delays by speeding up decision-making. It can also reduce costs by freeing the manager for other tasks. Escalation procedures. This refers to providing a means of raising issues to higher management for timely resolution. Examples of when this might be necessary include scope issues, major trade-off decisions, and serious resource conflicts. The final good practice for organizational structures relates to the composition of the structure. Let's do a quick exercise. Aim to spend no more than 15 minutes on this exercise, and then check out your study guide for some of our suggestions. When establishing a new organizational structure, what specific governance and management issues must you address? In the last section, you were introduced to the RACI charts that are a part of the documentation of each COBIT process. You may have noticed that these charts include not only roles, but also some organizational structures. For example, project steering committees. The COBIT 5 framework document describes a number of roles and organizational structures. These roles and structures may not exist in every enterprise, and if they do, their names might be different. In smaller organizations, a single role will serve the purposes of several roles described by COBIT. The key thing to appreciate is that every organization needs the value provided by each role documented. We'll look briefly at 3 of these roles and structures described. Please take the time to read the full list in the COBIT 5 framework document. The first role we'll look at is the Chief Risk Officer. COBIT describes this role as the most senior official of the enterprise who is accountable for all aspects of risk management across the enterprise. An IT risk officer function may be established to oversee IT-related risk. An example of an organizational structure is the Enterprise Risk Committee, which is described as the group of executives of the enterprise who are accountable for the enterprise-level collaboration and consensus required to support enterprise risk management, ERM, activities and decisions. An IT Risk Council may be established to consider IT risk in more detail and advise the Enterprise Risk Committee. Finally, some organizational structures are also functions, such as the Program and Project Management Office, which is described as the function responsible for supporting program and project managers and gathering, assessing, and reporting information about the conduct of their programs and constituent projects. Okay, we've looked at the good practices dimension of the organizational structures enabler. Next, we'll consider the relationship of this enabler with the other enablers. Processes. RACI charts link activities to organizational structures. Culture, ethics, and behavior determine the effectiveness and efficiency of organizational structures. Information is used and created by organizational structures. People, skills, and competencies must be taken into account when assigning roles and deciding the composition of organizational structures. Okay, that completes this lesson on the organizational structure enabler. You learned about good practices and roles. Before we complete this lesson, here's a quick quiz to test what you've learned. At the end of the quiz, you'll receive your result and can try the questions again if you would like to. The next lesson is Module 3, Lesson 4. In that lesson, we'll study the culture, ethics, and behavior enabler.